All right, so we got a pretty big update here on this dual track infrastructure process that Democrats are insisting on continuing. And I stand by that this is a completely nonsense strategy that they never had to undertake. They could have just done this in one gigantic package, put it all together, and then gotten their party to fall in line. But of course, they weren't willing to do that. Joe Biden wanted a watered down, less significant package. So he said, I want to go work with Republicans and come up with a bipartisan deal, which is really pathetic. I mean, it's only, a couple $1 billion in new spending. It's nowhere close to adequate. And it's really just a corporate giveaway that privatizes a lot of our infrastructure, and it's a garbage bill. And then on top of that, we now have a gigantic update on the partisan package that they're going to be doing in correspondence with this. Now, there's a bunch of nuances that we have to talk about in this and why it might not actually end up being this top line number that they're putting out here. But with the limited information that we have right now, because we obviously don't have all of the details ironed out within this, it's going to take a process that they're going to have to go through in the Senate before we know everything that's going to be in this bill. But I'll show you guys what we know so far. So Democrats unveil $3.5 trillion go it alone plan to fulfill Biden's agenda. The proposal sets an overall limit for the array of Democratic policy ambitions that won't make it into a bipartisan infrastructure deal if Congress can't reach one. So what's in this thing? As of what we know so far, Democrats' massive party line package is, again, I really hate how they just throw these words around without setting an actual standard for what they're speaking relative to. Democrats' massive party line package. Well, massive based on what? I mean, massive based on what the Society of Civil Engineers is telling us we need? No, it's completely inadequate if that's our standard. Massive in terms of what scientists are telling us we need to invest in climate infrastructure? No, it's again pathetically small in regards to that or relative to that. And yet these articles, they always just say like massive because it's got $1 trillion behind it, and so everything is massive and big number. Wow, that's crazy, but whatever. Democrats' massive party line package is expected to include policies like Biden's proposal for 2 years of free community college. Don't know why you would only do 2 years or why it would only be that. You should be making public college tuition completely tuition free and available to everybody. But, it's something. 2 years of free community college, paid leave, good. Healthcare subsidies. Again, just handouts to private insurance companies when we should be moving in the direction of getting rid of the privatization within our healthcare industry. We need to be moving towards something like a Medicare for all single payer system or even the nationalization of our healthcare system. But again, let's go ahead and just give more handouts to the insurance companies that are ripping off Americans. So healthcare subsidies and extending the boosted child tax credit, that's fantastic. And helping families cover child care costs. Again, some good things there, okay? So Schumer has said he hopes to adopt the budget resolution on the floor in the next few weeks. That vote will be the first step towards passing the remaining elements of Biden's social and economic plans without Republican support, the leader told Democratic senators in a letter this month, warning the possibility of working long nights, weekends, and remaining in Washington. Oh my God, you're going to actually have to do your job. It's amazing. Meanwhile, negotiations on the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which would require support from at least 10 Senate Republicans, are starting to get shaky amid GOP concerns over spending and ways to finance the legislation. Okay, so again, this bipartisan bill that Biden has been working on with Republicans, it's already falling apart, okay? He only managed to get, I think it was like 11 Republican senators to say they would even think about getting behind that bill. And even those senators, many of them are already starting to shake on like nothing. I mean, he basically went to the Republican Party, said, can you write this bill for me? It's not like the left had any major concessions that they got out of this bill. And he basically just let them write it, and then they're still not getting behind it. And they're not getting behind it in large part because Republicans are starting to say, if you guys are going to try to do this bipartisan deal with us, and then you're going to immediately turn around and do a bigger partisan one, then we're not going to play this game with you, and we're not going to work with you. So as of right now, what it seems is going to happen is if Democrats seriously start pushing forward this 3.5 one, as if it's supposed to be hand in hand with the bipartisan one, then Republicans are just going to drop off, and they're not going to try to help Democrats do this dual track plan. That's what I think is going to happen. I think they're going to end up sabotaging Biden in the end. So we'll see if I'm right on that, but I'm pretty confident in that prediction. But on top of that, this 3.5 trillion, listen, man, I mean, Bernie was out there, trying to wheel and deal behind the scenes. And the initial thing that he put out was he wanted $6 trillion in the partisan package. And I was advocating for him to draw that as a red line in the sand. Did he do that? No, he kind of came out and endorsed this $3.5 trillion plan in its, fullness and basically just said, this is good enough. And this is what we're going to try to be working with, which, whatever, he can have his own opinion. I don't think it's anything close to enough. Like the Sunrise Movement is pointing out, they estimate we should have at least $10 trillion spent over the next decade in climate infrastructure so we can adequately tackle, the largest threat to humanity right now on the planet and climate change. So $10 trillion, that's what I would have started the negotiations at, and then drawn some red lines in the sand as far as specific policy agenda items that I want included in it. Bernie didn't seem to really do that. He seems like he's okay with moving to this $3.5 trillion number, and the $3.5 trillion number, I really don't think is going to hold, okay? Because how are you going to get this passed with people like Joe Manchin in your party who are making demands like this? Manchin says Dems need to pay for their multi-trillion-dollar spending plans. I'd like to pay for all of it, the influential West Virginia centrist said. He's not a centrist. I don't think we need more debt. Okay, so this is bullshit for a number of reasons we're going to get into, but just as far as what he's trying to say here. So as far as the corporate tax rates, this is the problem. So he says, we need to pay for it. I'd like to pay for all of it. I don't think we need more debt. And Democrats are planning to raise taxes on corporations and the wealthy to pay for new childcare, education, and climate change programs, and Manchin is on board with that plan in concept, but he wants smaller tax increases on both corporate taxes and capital gains for wealthy earners than Biden and the rest of the party do. So, okay, so he's going to water it down, right? Manchin has suggested rates of 25% for corporate earners, less than what it was under Obama, significantly, and 28% for capital gains. More modest tax increases would curtail the size of the bill if Manchin and other moderates insist on avoiding any more deficit spending in the forthcoming mega legislation, again, what the fuck, which Democrats are planning to steer to package without the GOP buy-in using budget process. So, again, what's really important here is if they want to avoid adding any more deficit spending. Okay, so first of all, this is nonsense. I've described this in my previous videos before. This is not how federal spending works. So a lot of these politicians, and by the way, this is a line that was literally silver platter delivered to Joe Manchin by ExxonMobil. That's what we got from the leaks that I've covered on this channel before of that Exxon lobbyist who is basically describing in detail exactly what lines they want these centrists like Joe Manchin to go out and start using in order to water down this package. And one of those lines is asking how you're going to pay for it. And so this is why it's nonsense. If you know anything about federal spending, okay, it's not the same as state or local spending. It's not the same as your household spending, and so the debt is not the same as you would have to think about it in terms of your own personal life, where somebody's going to come and collect on that debt, and you could be sent to jail if you don't pay your debts. This is not how federal spending works at all, especially on something like infrastructure. So all of those other things that I just listed, local, state, governments, and as well as your household debt, you are all currency users. The federal government is the currency issuer. Okay, so there are not the same limits and constraints on how much we can actually spend on things like this. So the actual limit on what we would be able to spend on something like this would be inflation, and we are nowhere close to having a problem with inflation right now. So we should be going big, and especially on infrastructure. Even if you don't get behind the main tenets of modern monetary theory, the infrastructure itself is the most reliable way of getting a return on your investment from deficit spending. If there was ever going to be anything within the government that has a reliable return on investment that you should be deficit spending on, it's infrastructure. Why? Because it pays for itself over time. You are expanding economic sectors. You are improving efficiency because you don't have, trucks who are having to avoid broken bridges, or trucks that are, breaking down because of the potholes from our unfilled roads, etc. It improves efficiency. It expands economic sectors. It creates millions of good paying jobs depending on how big you want to go. So these are the ways that it pays for itself. You don't have to worry about adding to the debt. That's not how this works at all. So it's a completely false premise that Joe Manchin is trying to put forward here, but understand that false premise has a purpose. The false premise, again, was hand delivered to him from ExxonMobil, because they know that if they have an upper limit on how much we are willing to spend on infrastructure, then we're going to start taking some things out. And what are the first things that they're most likely to take out? Well, it's not going to be necessarily roads and bridges. It's going to be things like climate legislation, and that's what ExxonMobil is hoping for, or it will result in not raising the taxes as much as they should be. So this is the situation that we have right now. 3.5 trillion seems to be that top line number that they're going to go for. Is it actually going to end up being 3.5 trillion? I don't think so. I really just heavily doubt that, because we still have to deal with Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, and there's no evidence whatsoever that they're willing to just fall in line with that $3.5 trillion number. And we also know that Joe Biden is not willing to fight them on that or push them to accept that as it is. So we'll have to see how this unfolds. But as of right now, I'm not convinced that this is even good enough based on its own merits. But on top of that, we still have to acknowledge the fact that this is going to inevitably be watered down. So we'll have to see how this ends up turning out, and I'll keep you guys updated as we get more information.